And then I'll start the webinar. We'll give it just a second to get everybody welcome. Well, good morning, everyone. We want to welcome you today to a program that we've been excited for a while to host. The Future is Now, Creating a 21st Century Energy Policy in Wisconsin. My name is Fred Clark, and I'm the Executive Director of Wisconsin's Green Fire. And we're really glad today to have with us some real thought leaders in the energy space here in Wisconsin. So we'll be joined today by Gary Radloff, who is the work group co-chair of our energy policy group here at Wisconsin's Green Fire, along with our panelists today, energy consultant Keith Reopelle, Executive Director of Renew Wisconsin, Heather Allen, and the Executive Director of Midwest Renewable Energy Association, Nick Hylla. You'll hear more about our panelists from Gary, who will moderate the program today. But we're excited to get started. Just a couple of housekeeping items. I think almost everyone's familiar with Zoom webinars by now, but you've got a couple of little controls at your disposal here. You can change the view of what you're seeing today just by going up to the upper right-hand corner of your screen, and you can toggle between a speaker view and a gallery view, depending on your preference. And you should also today be able to see the presentations that several of our panelists will have, in addition to seeing us all. We want to reserve, and we will reserve about half of the program today, about 40 minutes or so at least, for questions, your questions. And so after our panelists provide their presentations, we'll wait until the end to begin asking them questions, but you don't have to wait to formulate your questions. So as you've got thoughts and ideas and questions that are triggered for you by the presentations, please submit those in the Q&A box, which will be one of the boxes available to you in the lower portion of your screen. So put your questions into the Q&A box anytime. And likewise, if you're having technical difficulties or any other requests that you want to make for us, you could put those into the chat box. The chats will be monitored by me and by Sarah Peterson, who's helping us out on the technology side today. Wisconsin's Green Fire is proud to host this program and also proud to have a role to play in sort of discussion about energy and energy policy here in Wisconsin. We are entering our 5th year as a 501c3 organization. And Wisconsin's Green Fire mission is to simply promote the role of science in conservation of natural resources and conservation of our environment. We're organized as a membership association. We have over 500 members around the state, many of whom are conservation professionals who have spent careers in fields including air quality, climate change, environmental education, fisheries, wildlife, forestry, public lands, water resources, environmental protection, the law around public trust and wetlands. And we also have a fairly new young professional group of students and people just entering conservation careers. So check us out at wigreenfire.org. If this is your first time with a Wisconsin's Green Fire program, we're glad that you're here, and we hope that you'll take advantage of the opportunity to learn more about our work. And that work includes our members who are really the face of the organization, who work throughout the state, both at a state level and a local level, to advance pro-conservation policy and to help share understanding of the science that is behind so much of what happens and what needs to happen in our natural resources work. We work in the Capitol with legislators and their staff to provide information for them to be a resource on both proposals and the background on key issues. Our expert members provide testimony both to state legislators as well as the Wisconsin Natural Resources Board and at the local level. We partner extensively with other allied conservation organizations and user group organizations throughout the state. And finally, our young professional group is really knitting together a network of students across the state in different conservation related programs. And now to focus on our work in energy policy, I am going to turn it over to Gary Radloff, who is the co-chair of Wisconsin's Green Fire Energy Policy Group. Gary was formerly the director of the UW-Madison's Energy Policy Center and has worn a number of different hats in state government and in academia here in Wisconsin. We just published a paper called "The Future is Now, Creating a 21st Century Energy Policy," for which Gary was one of our lead authors. Gary, I'll turn it over to you. And
Gary, you need to unmute.
need to unmute.
Sorry, folks. Thank you, Fred. As was mentioned, I'm Gary Radloff, and I co-chair with Carrie Hylla the Wisconsin Green Fire Energy Policy Working Group. And again, I want to welcome you to the webinar and our panel discussion. Wisconsin Green Fire believes now is a critical time for all of you to engage and get involved with Wisconsin's energy system. And that maybe not be something you do on a regular basis, and certainly not on a daily basis. But the reason I think this is a particularly critical time is what's going on in federal, state, and local governments. For example, right now the Wisconsin legislature is about to start hearings on the state budget, which Governor Evers submitted to them about a month or so back. And in that document are an impressive number of energy policy provisions. We were reviewing those just recently and counted up about 28 different items. Particularly if you want to look at those under the Department of Administration, there's close to a dozen, and close to another dozen under the Public Service Commission, as well as some things in public education and training. As someone who's followed the state budget process for almost my entire professional career, this really is one of the most comprehensive set of budget items around the energy sector. So I strongly urge you to take a look at those. I strongly urge you, if you can, to participate in what I believe are going to be 3 statewide hearings by the Joint Finance Committee, at least 1 or 2 that are going to be virtual. I know it's harder during these times of COVID to do that, but you know, your voice needs to be heard. Another thing that particularly caught the eye of Wisconsin Green Fire is a very recently announced Wisconsin Public Service open docket, which means it's not a specific rate case or anything in the contested hearing process or any of that formal part of the PSC, but really more of a way for the commissioners to gather information. And then I think ultimately they might sort of slice and dice some of that information up into more formal dockets. But it has an interesting title called The Roadmap to Zero Carbon Electricity. And I think the timing on this is again, just incredibly important and critical, because I think that where we're at right now in Wisconsin is, I like to describe it as 1 foot in the old legacy energy system and 1 foot in the new future, more distributed, more renewable, cleaner, greener energy system, if you will. And so we maybe will have a time a little bit to talk about how you can connect with that docket. The public was always invited to at least submit comments. And the other thing that I think is really exciting is a state energy plan is being prepared by, coordinated by one of our panelists, Keith Reopelle, and so he's going to talk much more about that. Fortunately, Wisconsin Green Fire had a little bit of serendipity, if you will. We also have just put out this document that is our future vision for the energy system. And it is titled, "The Future is Now, Creating a 21st Century Energy Policy." And I sure hope you have taken a look at it already, but if you haven't, please do. You can agree or disagree with the 30 or so recommendations we make, but we felt that these were really important items to at least to start a discussion around. And shortly I'll be introducing our panelists, and I know that they will have other ideas as well. I want to very briefly just kind of touch on or highlight a couple of things in the Wisconsin Green Fire policy paper. And again, keep in mind that this is sort of with an eye to the future, even though many of these items may even come up, as I mentioned, in the budget debate or in this legislative session or in a future Public Service Commission docket or hearing. We've talked a lot about what are called distributed energy resources. These are largely new technologies, or at least modernized technologies, that I think really change the paradigm in the energy system. We are so focused on energy generation and the important policies around that, but I think we sometimes lose sight of the fact that if we kind of start to reverse things and think about energy demand, energy efficiency, and couldn't that be the center or the paradigm for how we approach a future system? It really changes things and allows us to, I think, build an energy system of the future that is much more efficient, much cleaner, and reduces greenhouse gases, and dare I say, might even save money. Although in the energy world, that's always a challenge. So we suggest certain things around distributed energy resources that might need to be changed. And one of those include that Wisconsin should develop some type of planning process. And that's why I'm so excited about this new open docket, because I think if you're looking at a roadmap for the future, that's quasi-planning at least. I think there could be some more formal planning at the Public Service Commission level, but I think it's time to look at that and think about how do we integrate these new technologies called distributed energy resources into the energy system in what can be the most cost-effective way and the most efficient way. And some of that involves, really studying in conjunction, I think, with the Wisconsin utilities, where things can be sited first, where is it most efficient to site them, how can we assist customers to become prosumers and be active participants in our energy system in Wisconsin, help manage that system through things like demand management, or I prefer to call it demand flexibility for reasons we might talk about later. And so I think that fits in with another recommendation we have, which is kind of around this broad banner of energy democracy, that the public is going to get more involved in the energy system, I think, every day and week and month as we go forward. And so we have to think about what that means, how we change some policies, and we're certainly going to be talking about that in the panel discussion, and really sort of prepare Wisconsin citizens to be intelligent and active prosumers. We talk a little bit about some rate making changes, which is kind of a technical or insider geeky thing, but nonetheless, that's what people who work in policy do. And we mentioned something called performance-based rate making, which I really like, because it really allows us to match up our policy goals with how we reimburse our utilities. And we can talk more about that as we go forward. So I'm going to kind of stop there, because you can read the report and we're happy to answer questions around that. And I'm going to just briefly here introduce our panelists and we'll get started. We're going to kick it off with Keith Reopelle. Keith's a longtime friend and colleague, and he's been involved in just about every environmental and energy policy in Wisconsin over his career. He's currently working as an advanced program and policy analyst with the Wisconsin Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy with the support from the U.S. Climate Alliance. Keith is also an active member of Wisconsin Green Fire and a member of our energy policy group. His focus for the state of Wisconsin is the development of a statewide clean energy plan. Before coming on board for the Wisconsin Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy, he was the first director of Dane County's Office of Energy and Climate Change, where he led the development of and wrote the Dane County's first climate action plan. Prior to his 3 years with Dane County, Keith was the senior policy director at Clean Wisconsin, where he worked for 32 years, leading clean energy and climate campaigns at state and regional levels. He served on numerous energy and climate-related task force and advisory committees. Keith has a BS in wildlife ecology and an MS in environmental communications from the University of Wisconsin. Our second panelist is Heather Allen. Heather Allen is Executive Director of Renew Wisconsin, where she leads a team of experienced staff to accelerate the Badger State's transformation to renewable energy through advocacy, education, and collaboration. She works closely with Renew members to grow the solar, wind, geothermal, biogas, electric vehicle, and energy storage market in Wisconsin. Heather joined Renew in July of 2018 as program director to deploy solar on homes, businesses, congregations, and nonprofits. Heather served for 6 years as a legislative analyst for the city of Madison before joining Renew. Prior to that, she worked on programs and policy for Clean Lakes Alliance, Natural Resources Defense Council, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. She studied conservation biology as an undergraduate at UW-Madison, received her master's degree in international environmental policy from the Middlebury Institute of International Studies in Monterey, California. And somebody should ask her a question, how she could leave the beautiful Monterey area. And our final panelist is Nick Hylla, who's the Executive Director for the Midwest Renewable Energy Association, where he works in partnership with organizations throughout the Midwest to advance solar education and market development initiatives. Nick holds an MS degree in natural resource management and has 15 years of experience in nonprofit leadership. He served as the principal investigator on 6 U.S. Department of Energy assistant agreements to support solar workforce development and reduce the soft costs of solar energy development for Midwest states. And those are our 3 panelists. And as I mentioned, Keith Reopelle is going to start. So I am going to turn it over to Keith, and I will pop in periodically to introduce the other panelists. Take it away, Keith.
All right, thank you very much, Gary. I appreciate it. So as Gary said, my name is Keith Reopelle, and I'm working as an analyst and advisor to the Wisconsin Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy, specifically helping them to develop a clean energy plan for the state of Wisconsin. I have some slides, and I think they're going to be up any moment now. I'm getting a little support from Fred and folks at Wisconsin Green Fire. But I'll just I'll jump into the first substantive slide with a few talking points about it. So I know you'll catch up.
Sorry, Keith. Are you seeing the full frame here? I'm not sure if I need to swap the view or not.
Oh, so and the reason I'm getting some help from Wisconsin Green Fire is that I live in rural Wisconsin where the bandwidth is terrible, and actually I still see Gary on my screen. So hopefully I'll see my slides soon.
Okay.
I can see
Sorry.
it. It's pretty clear on my end.
Okay.
See the slides.
Sorry about that.
We can tell you what we're seeing.
We'll work through it. Okay, thank you. The Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy was created with Governor Evers' Executive Order number 38 in 2019. That not only created the office, it also created a couple of goals for the state of Wisconsin. One, to be compliant with the Paris Climate Agreement, and a second one to get to 100% carbon-free electricity by the year 2050. That executive order also called for Wisconsin to develop a clean energy plan. And that's a plan we're in the midst of development right now. I think you're looking at a slide with a number of different objectives of that plan. And in addition to meeting those targets laid out in the executive order, there's also other objectives, including economic development, equitable opportunities for job creation, reducing disproportionate impacts on communities of color and low-income communities from energy production and use, improving reliability, affordability. I'm not going to go through all of the points on all of these slides. We will make the slide deck available to you later, and so I'm going to just give kind of a quick overview. Go ahead to the next slide. And I want to try something because it would really help if I could see these. My apologies. Actually, I'm going to take just a minute to pull it up separately on my laptop here. Again, my apologies.
Sounds good.
But this will help me a lot. Okay. All right. So in putting this together, we have several teams. It's a very large, robust effort. We have a leadership team, which is really leaders in the state of Wisconsin. It includes the governor's office, the lieutenant governor's office, and heads of many of the agencies in the state. Then there's an agency technical team. This is just what it sounds like. These are technical experts from the PSC, DNR, Department of Agriculture, Workforce Development, pretty much you name it, most, if not all of the agencies in the state. Then there's an external technical team. That's just what it sounds like. It's about a dozen organizations. It's being coordinated and led by Slipstream, and Wisconsin Green Fire is one of many other organizations that are lending technical expertise. Rocky Mountain Institute, Center for Energy and Environment, a lot of other organizations that I know many of our participants are familiar with. And then there's a stakeholder advisory team. This is a group of more than 30, very diverse group of more than 30 stakeholders, utilities, equity and justice organizations, environmental groups, many businesses, local government. And so private sector, a diversity of private sector stakeholders are part of that team. You can go to the next slide. And then there is a core group that's actually doing the drafting, and that's who you see here. Maria Redmond is the director of the Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy. Fiona and I are supporting Maria's efforts to pull this plan together. The whole process is being facilitated by Doug Scott at the Great Plains Institute. And as I already mentioned, Slipstream is coordinating the effort of the technical expert team. Frank Greb is the president there, and Robin Lisowski is the lead for that effort. Next slide. One thing to know is that this effort is not starting from scratch. There have been many robust collaborative efforts to look at Wisconsin's energy future, and a few of them are listed here. The Mid-Continent Power Sector Collaborative is something that the Great Plains Institute has been leading for more than 10 years, and it's a collaborative of Midwestern utilities, regulators, and NGOs. And they have put together 3 different roadmaps. This is for basically the MISO footprint, a power sector roadmap, a transportation electrification roadmap, and a buildings, think of it as buildings electrification or buildings carbon emission roadmap. All 3 of these roadmaps have robust modeling that look at how we get to a 85% and 90% reduction of carbon emissions, again, region-wide. There's another effort similar, more recent Wisconsin Energy Distribution and Technology Initiative. This again is multi-stakeholders. This was specific just to Wisconsin, and it was led by MWork and Great Plains Institute. And then I'm sure folks are very familiar with the most recent of these efforts, Governor's Climate Change Task Force. All of these efforts have come up with recommendations for a path forward to a decarbonized clean energy economy. And basically, this clean energy plan we're developing is sort of starting with the recommendations and the insights from all these efforts and building upon it. Next slide. This is just a graphic sort of showing what I've been describing so far, where sort of the efforts we're building on, where ideas are coming from, technical analysis. Then there's a drafting group. Draft working document is what DWD stands for there, and the 4 teams I showed you. And at the end of the process, which this process started last fall, it'll end later this spring, and at that point we'll have a clean energy plan version 1. It'll be a living document. It'll create metrics. Those metrics will be tracked and evaluated over time, and the plan will be updated periodically moving forward. But that first version will be done probably sometime in June. So a couple slides here about technical analysis. And again, I apologize, there's a lot of words on these slides, and I won't go through all of them, but you will have a chance to look at them at your leisure later. There are 2 models that we're using. One is called an Energy Policy Simulator. This is a model that was developed by the Rocky Mountain Institute and a group called Energy Innovation. I'll show you a little bit about that model. And then the second model that we're using is called Juicebox. It's a very powerful power sector model that was developed by Paul Meyer. Paul Meyer, formerly with the UW-Wisconsin Energy Center. And I have just a couple slides here that show you how these models work the way many models work. The Energy Policy Simulator, what you see here is a couple of screenshots from this model in use. On the left, you have a variety of policy levers. You can just choose whatever policies you want and how much by what date. And then on the right are the various outputs. And this model is, one of the great things about it is it gives you a lot of different outputs. It'll tell you what are emissions, what the result is for emissions, what the result is for cost savings, job creation, health benefits, energy use, and many, many others as you get a sense from that screen, that drop-down menu. If we just here's just an example simulation, 3 policies. These are policies we either have established in Wisconsin or are considering. The first one is 50% of all autos and trucks registered in Wisconsin are electric or zero emission by 2030. The Executive Order 38 target of 100% free carbon-free power, electricity by 2050, and then a pretty dramatic increase in energy efficiency achievement, 2.5% for kilowatt hour use reduction. Right now, Wisconsin's at about 0.7. And then, the simulator spits out this sort of graph showing you how far the emissions are reduced with those 3 policies put into place and how close it comes to getting to what the IPCC has told us we need to reach if this were done, obviously globally, which is 1.5 degrees. Really, that's the majority of my substantive slides. I know we're trying to save most of our time here for Q&A, or a good chunk of it. So I have 4 more slides here, and this just reads as sort of a table of contents for the draft document that we have in our hands right now. So think of these as sort of chapters in the Clean Energy Plan: environmental justice, low income customers, clean energy project financing, workforce development, the role of local governments, agricultural issues, the ag sector broadly. Then there's a whole bunch that kind of fit into a power sector, under a power sector heading. Energy storage, new clean generation, renewable generation, transmission, renewable energy specifically, greenhouse gas programs, think of that as direct regulation or direct of carbon or sort of greenhouse gas policy broadly. Innovation, collaboration, and data. Then there are 4 sections related to energy efficiency and reducing emissions as a result of buildings and industries. So we have energy efficiency program policies and programs, building codes, industrial emission reduction, and building electrification. And then lastly, a section with transportation recommendations, electrification of the transportation sector, the clean fuels, set of recommendations or policies, smart growth, and active transportation. This table of contents, if you will, is what is in a draft document that we're working on right now. This could change, just FYI. It's not anywhere near being a final draft. It probably will change in terms of how it's organized, but I just show this to give you a sense of the breadth and how comprehensive the plan is. And that's my last substantive slide. Here's some contact information, primarily for those of us at the State Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy. If you have questions about that simulator model or the juice box model, Robin Sowski at Slipstream is a good person to contact on that. And the last thing I want to say before I hand it back to Gary is that we are very interested in public input on this clean energy plan. There will be a very intentional, specific effort to get public comment. At this point, it looks like we will have a document ready to go out for public comment sometime towards the end of April. And I urge you to watch for that. I'm sure that we will make the link available through Wisconsin Green Fire, so you could visit Wisconsin Green Fire's website to get a link to that opportunity to comment. And really, you know, this is a huge undertaking to come up with a plan for the policies and programs that Wisconsin needs to put in place to make a relatively fast transition from our fossil fuel economy of today to a clean energy economy of tomorrow. And it's really going to depend on having, you know, innovation and great ideas. So we'd love to hear from everybody who's attending this webinar today when that time comes. And I'll be happy to answer questions when we get to that point later. Thanks very much. And Gary, I will pass it back to you.
Thank you so much, Keith. This is very exciting, and Wisconsin Green Fire will certainly be more than willing to help people find links to the draft report once it's out, and any other information that comes from them. So Heather, if you can kind of start to boot up your presentation, and I will pass it over to you when you're ready.
Hey, how's that look? Is that full screen?
Yes, that looks great, Heather.
Okay, thank you. Hi, very excited to be here today. Thank you to Wisconsin Green Fire and to Gary and Keith and Fred and Nick. I'm really honored to be part of this group, really among giants here in renewable energy in Wisconsin. I actually first learned about distributed energy resources, or DERs, from Gary about 5 years ago when we met to talk about your sensors and controls report on the Wisconsin Energy Broadcast. So it's really fun to come full circle and to really know what those are and to be able to talk about them. So, and thank you for all the work that Wisconsin Green Fire is doing and Keith is doing with the Clean Energy Plan. And to Nick at MREA, such a huge leader on workforce and education and renewable energy in Wisconsin. It's just a great panel. I'm very happy to be here. So I'm Heather, I'm with Renew Wisconsin. I took the reins when Tyler Hebner was appointed as commissioner to the Public Service Commission. So very big shoes to fill, but we are keeping busy, launching us into the future of renewable energy in Wisconsin through education, advocacy, and policy. Here's our team as it currently stands, although we just hired someone who started on Monday in electric vehicles. We've had people move on to bigger and brighter things like the Public Service Commission, but we're full steam ahead now to dive into even more areas of work beyond wind, solar, and biogas, geothermal. We're now working quite extensively on electric vehicles, energy storage, and beneficial electrification. It's actually our 30th anniversary this year. We were founded in 1991. And I know that Sarah Peterson will be putting in the chat a link to one of the resources that Renew Wisconsin can provide. If you're interested in renewable energy in your community or where things stand in the state today, we have an updated map of all different types of renewable energy in Wisconsin, with the exception of residential solar, because that's too numerous to keep track of for us anymore. But biogas, wind, solar on rooftops, commercial rooftops, schools, things like that. It's a really good list. So check out that link in the website and you can play with that map and make it your own. So without further ado, let me dive in. I'm going to go pretty fast through my slides, but I'll make those available afterwards. And if you have questions, we can certainly talk about those. This is our energy picture as it stands most recently in 2019. We still get the majority of our electricity generation from fossil fuels. So we still have quite a long way to go, although coal is really ramping down quite quickly now. We just had an announcement this morning from Alliant. They are purchasing or seeking to acquire their second tranche of large solar farms to compensate for the fact that the Columbia coal-fired power plant is going to be retired earlier than we expected in 2024. So that is good news all around. And there is breaking news every day in renewable energy, in part because wind and solar prices continue to decline, and they are cost competitive with natural gas or fracked gas, and they beat out coal quite effectively. As a result of the economic trends in renewables, we have a lot of opportunities to invest in them, and utilities see the benefits, the economic benefits, both for their entities and for ratepayers to save money by shifting to renewable energy. Here's a smattering of the largest utilities in the state and how the commitments they've made to shift to renewables or reduce emissions, or both. And this is what we have to look forward to here. There's thousands of megawatts of solar and wind and even battery storage in the MISO queue. The MISO Mid-Continent Independent System Operator that Keith mentioned earlier, that's really sort of like the central time zone grid. It's operated by MISO. And so as a developer is looking to put a new energy project onto the grid, they have to apply to MISO. And they let us know that these things are potentially coming. If everything on this map was developed, we would have about 33% of Wisconsin's electricity powered by renewable energy. So we still have quite a long way to go, and a lot of projects need to get through the pipeline to reach our goals. But the good news is the trends are really continuing to move forward quite quickly. Corporations are also seeing the benefits to invest in renewable energy, both as buyers and also to be in the industry itself. So there's a lot of momentum, and these allies can be very useful, communicating the value of renewable energy to new partners who may not have been inclined to be supportive of renewable energy work in the past. Let's talk policy. Keith gave us a fantastic overview. What I'd like to offer you is our sort of historic perspective on the big things that we've seen happen in Wisconsin. In 1992, there were the first federal tax credits for wind energy. And in 94, Wisconsin established the Energy Priorities Law. Our portfolio standard was first established in 1999 and elevated in 2005. We saw the first tax credits for solar in 2008, and an extension of both the wind and the solar tax credits took place in 2015. Those tax credits have been incredibly influential in advancing the renewable market when it needed it the most. And this last year, at the end of 2020, the stimulus package that was passed at that time actually included extensions of the wind and solar tax credits. And we expect that those will be very powerful movers as well in the industry, both for rooftop type projects, customer owned generation, and for large scale development. And we have, as Keith said, and Gary said, a number of opportunities going forward. We have the zero carbon roadmap docket, which is this generic docket that has been previously discussed. The Public Service Commission is working on improving interconnection standards. So that's the process your local solar installer has to go through to get the solar that you just put on your rooftop connected to the grid. And they have to work with the utilities to work through all the details and make sure that's a safe and efficient process. Our interconnection hasn't been updated since 2004, and there's been tremendous advances in technology, including a number of customers adding batteries to their projects. So this is a vitally important update. So it's a little bit wonky, but it's critically important. And the good news is that's moving forward. We've also got something called the parallel generation docket at the Public Service Commission. This is one of our favorites because it really has the opportunity to advance the conversation on net metering, improve and standardize net metering across utilities that have disparate net metering policies, and to truly reflect all of the benefits that distributed energy resources or customer-owned generation bring to the grid. Those are not accurately reflected now in the payback rates that customers get for the generation they've invested in and then they've put on their own property, and then are supporting the grid with that reliability and that distributed generation. So we're excited to see how this docket moves forward. The next major hurdle there will be what we see the utility modeling produce in September. And we're also seeing a great deal of progress on microgrids and batteries and even EV programs. So really excited to see the potential to build resilience and more grid reliability through these new technologies. I'd like to mention transportation really quickly. This is an area that we need to think about because 25% of Wisconsin's energy consumption is used for transportation. And we spend about $8 billion a year importing fossil fuels from out of state just for transportation. That's a lot of money that if we had renewable energy generation at higher levels in Wisconsin, and you could plug your electric vehicle into the grid, into your own home or an EV charging system at a way station or a gas station, all of that money would stay in the state because you're not importing fossil fuels to power those vehicles. That's vitally important both for the environment, for the climate, and for the economy. And we have a number of opportunities with EVs. We have to start systematically planning for statewide and regional infrastructure and facilitating EV charging as conveniently and accessibly as possible. There is interest from some of the gas station networks to start doing this work. Quick Trip has actually made a clear statement that they're interested in potentially installing EV charging at all of their facilities. That would be a game changer. Folks need to have access in Wisconsin to purchase EVs directly in some cases. And we need to do a lot more work to explain how fun they are to drive, how you can drive on sunshine, and how they can save you money over time. There's also still a great deal of opportunity for biogas in Wisconsin. There's 40 total biogas facilities in Wisconsin, according to Renew's counts right now. Most of those are on farms. In the last couple of years, those biogas facilities that were generating electricity have mostly been converted to producing renewable natural gas, which can be used to support heating and transportation markets. So there's a lot of potential here. And we need to sort of think about this from a big picture, economy-wide, systems-wide approach to really maximize the opportunity in Wisconsin. So here's someone everyone may know and love. This is Public Service Commissioner Tyler Huebner in Downsville Solar Farm and a number of other, I would call these, oh, that's my time is up. I would call these small scale solar farms, so maybe 1 to 5 megawatt solar farms, but you can see how they can be integrated in the landscape. You can plant pollinator friendly plantings or plants that support soil regeneration and erosion control. So there's a lot of great ways to do solar farms and to seamlessly integrate them into the habitat. Here's a snapshot of the existing small scale solar farms in Wisconsin. You can see we have about 33 installations today, a total of 35 megawatts of capacity. So for your perspective, we have about 300 megawatts of solar operating in Wisconsin today. This represents about 10% of that total amount, these solar farms. Half of it is 150 megawatts from Two Creeks, which is one big project. And then the rest is distributed solar. Larger solar farms can provide serious revenue to a community. In addition to landowner payments, leases that solar developers pay to the landowner to use the land, the counties and townships of a project receive about $4,000 total per megawatt. So in the case of Badger Hollow, which is a large project in Iowa County, the local governments will receive over $1 million a year for 30 years. That can support rural budgets significantly, and it can be a strong benefit for communities that are looking to transition to renewable energy. I mentioned Badger Hollow. Here's just a snapshot of some of the projects that have moved forward or are moving forward. Badger Hollow is under construction in Iowa County. That's that project on the map there, on the far left side. Richland County, also in southwest Wisconsin, about 50 megawatts of solar. So that's a small, large scale project. And then the Two Creeks project right on Lake Michigan there, that's the project that's been energized, and it doubled our solar capacity when it was energized in November. And we're just seeing a lot of great rooftop solar. Here's some of the larger projects. These were surpassed by the Platteville project, which is at UW Platteville, which is about 2.4 megawatts, but you can see how exciting, how big these projects are getting. It's important to know that one of the limiting factors for those type of projects, rooftop projects, customer-owned projects, is financing. One way to address financing is through something called third-party ownership. So if you have a third party who provides the financing, so the customer doesn't have to provide the upfront costs, it's a lot easier to sign up to do solar on your property, whether you're a local government, a school, a private homeowner. Approximately, so you can look at the map here, approximately 28 states have explicitly authorized power purchase agreements, which is one version of third-party ownership. Those are the orange states here. The red states on this map are states that have explicitly disallowed it. That's a smaller group. And then the gray area, which Wisconsin is one of, is areas where the states have not provided affirmative clarity that third party is allowed. And this is a barrier because there are lots of types of entities, especially those from diverse communities who may not have upfront financing, who cannot go solar without support from third-party financing. So if we had third-party financing in Wisconsin, we could grow the market dramatically. Nick is going to talk a lot more about the importance of this policy. But just to give you a sense, 85% of the customer-owned solar in New Jersey is third-party financed. So you could take a look at what we have today in Wisconsin and imagine if people didn't have to pay thousands of dollars upfront, how much more solar we would have on the market. There's also progress in wind. The Red Barn Wind Farm, located in Grant County, way southwest Wisconsin, is a 92 megawatt project with 28 turbines that can power 40,000 homes. That project is moving forward, and we're excited to see that the utilities MG&E and WEC Energies will be acquiring that project. And finally, last but not least, jobs. Jobs are a critical reason that clean energy is important for Wisconsin. Some of the fastest growing jobs right now are advanced transportation, wind, and storage. And of course, solar continues to grow. And we're really happy to see all the growth in the last year, despite the pandemic. These are pictures of real clean energy workers doing their work. So I went pretty fast, but I'm excited to talk to you about your questions and have this conversation. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Heather. That was very informative. Nick Hylla is next. Nick is not going to use slides, so if you're looking on your screen for slides, they won't be there. But he is going to give us a quick history of Wisconsin energy policy and regulation. Take it away, Nick.
Hi, can you all hear me? Well, thanks so much to Keith and Heather and Gary and Fred and Sarah for having me. I really appreciate it. I want to start by giving a plug to the Wisconsin Green Fire publication again, as Gary mentioned, and explicitly in their objectives, their recommended actions. I think I really support what they've laid out here, and I think that the process of decision making is sometimes more important than the decisions that are made, and that is a bit of the framing for what I'd like to talk to you all about today. And I see there's many good questions, very good questions, the best list of questions I've ever seen on a webinar. So congratulations to all of you for being so astute and paying such close attention to Wisconsin energy policy. And I want to give everybody time to answer those questions, but I'm going to try to pick a few off as we go. And if I could frame my remarks today, I would say all of the benefits that we enjoy today from our electricity system can be traced as a direct result of public policy intervention in response to crises or in response to disruptive technologies. And that's really been borne out over the last 140 years in energy markets, and the market we have today is a result of the inertia that was created by the momentum that was created by many of those decisions. And you know, we wouldn't invent the electricity market today the way we have it. But that, you know, you have to go to battle with the army that you have, not the army that you want. And so I assume that everybody on this call shares the goals that we all share as panelists, which is to transition to a more local, beneficial, clean, resilient, reliable, and affordable energy system that serves the people and the planet as best as possible. And so starting from that premise, I think for me, what I see um, is that we have our work cut out for us in engaging the public and making energy a priority voter issue. And I posted a link in the chat to a recent blog post that looks at policy activity in states all across the United States related to solar, energy storage, grid modernization, and electric vehicles. And you'll notice that Wisconsin is a gray hole of inactivity surrounded by all kinds of activity around us. And I would say that's a direct result of our lack of focus on priorities that affect us as people, and our distraction by the carnival barking culture war that we're all subject to constantly. And so for me, I think it's important to understand very specifically the benefits of what we're talking about, and how those benefits are constrained or enabled by past policy. So I think I might go back to say that Wisconsin, there's a question in there. Is like, we used to be a leader. What happened? Well, we were a leader 100 years ago. We were the first state, let's see, in 1882 to establish a public electric utility, and it was about the size of a fishing shack as the Vulcan Street Mill in Appleton. It's still dedicated there with the plaque. It was a hydropower station that served a paper mill and a few other customers. And then we were also the first state to establish a public utility commission. I think if you're interested in the kind of like DC AC battle, go and watch the movie The Current Wars, the battle between Edison and Westinghouse. It's very good film. I think what it leaves out, however, is that neither of them won we all know Westinghouse's technology won, but who really won was JP Morgan. And they won by establishing a regulated utility business model that protects investors. And that model has served the country, had served the country very well because it incentivizes the construction of assets and the delivery of electricity, which for many years was paired with our productivity. And so in the early 1900s, we adopted this idea of the regulated utility business model from philosophical writings by John Stuart Mill from England and their experience in the grain mills and how for-profit unregulated grain mills almost took down the economy because it was a very farm-based economy. And energy was thought to be very similar, this natural monopoly. And so we established the regulatory bodies at the state level and began the deployment of electricity generation and transmission technology, but quickly realized also that that it wasn't profitable to get electricity everywhere. So also established the rural utility service, but only after the crisis of the Great Depression. The Great Depression really disrupted all kinds of businesses, including the investor-owned utilities, and the federal government intervened with what we know as the New Deal, which established the rural utility service, which still exists today and provides subsidized low to no interest loans to cooperative and municipal utilities to deploy 76% of the U.S. geography's electricity through co-ops and municipalities. And that was kind of the first major intervention after the crisis, was establishing the rural utility service and rural electrification. And we also established the Public Utility Holding Company Act and restricted investor-owned utility activities to within state lines to better empower state regulators to regulate the activities of the states. And this brought what we consider the golden age of electric utilities in Wisconsin, where we had rapid deployment of transmission lines and generation. And it's a pretty simple concept. If you protect returns for investors and give them long horizons to collect those returns, you'll attract more investors. And so that worked pretty much until the energy crisis of 1973, which put strains on all kinds of energy capacity. And what we quickly realized is that a system without competition tends to be corrupted. And so, surprise, surprise. So that's when we invented PURPA, which still exists today, the Public Utility Regulatory Policies Act, that allows merchant generators to connect to transmission infrastructure and requires that utilities connect any third-party provider that meets the basic requirements for interconnection and receive their avoided cost rates that the utility would determine and the public service commissions would determine as appropriate. That law resulted pretty much in all of the hydro, wind, and solar large-scale transmission interconnected solar you see out there. Without that law, there would be no requirement for utilities to interconnect private parties, and there would be less competition in the system. And we also, from that point, started the state integrated resource planning process, which in Wisconsin, I guess we call advanced plans, but which really doesn't actually exist in our state to any degree, which we see in the surrounding states. And that integrated resource planning was designed to help state regulators understand the long-term planning for utility assets, because if we're going to build a coal-fired power plant that we expect to operate for 30 years, then we should have a plan that looks out that far to understand what are the technologies out there, what are the limitations, what are demand forecasts, so we can better approve these projects. And we also then started this process of more stability in the system. We had some private competition, we had state level regulation, but throughout the 80s and beginning in the 90s, we realized that more competition was needed, and there was a move towards deregulation, and we first started thinking about climate change. So that's when we really empowered FERC, and FERC is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and to better manage the wholesale markets, we created the wholesale markets. The Midwest Interconnection System Operator, MISO, is our market, as Heather has alluded to, and those markets created wholesale competition to reduce prices. We invented the regional transmission organizations. States started putting out renewable portfolio standards. As Heather mentioned, we were one of the first states to do so. And then, FERC started to really focus on kind of like non-discriminatory access to transmission lines for merchant operators, and to really empower the federal government to create more competition in the wholesale markets. This is a little opaque in history. I see there's a question from Tom Wilson about this, and Keith probably knows more. In Wisconsin at that time, we established the public benefits program focused on energy in this kind of like opaque grand bargain that we're still dealing with today. That program is pretty much, as far as our state goes, the only competition that we have in the regulated system, meaning that we use 1.3 cents out of every dollar that ratepayers spend. We put it in a public benefits program and then use that money to incentivize efficiency and customer rooftop solar. And in the current structure, if you think about it this way, if I employ an efficiency technology or solar energy technology on my home or business, and the utility increases rates, that technology's return increases. So the general idea is that we're protecting ourselves from the constant inflation of electricity prices. And so that program has been really effective as far as ratepayer return. Audits consistently show north of $5 of return for every dollar we spend on efficiency. That in some ways came at the cost of integrated resource planning. And in Minnesota, for example, they require any new utility generation to go out to all resource bidding. So if I'm Xcel Energy or Great River Energy and I want to build capacity, I say, I need this much capacity at this time, and it goes out to bid, and any technology can bid on it. And now more and more solar and solar plus storage are winning those bids. We don't have that in Wisconsin at this point. Utility assets are, utility proposals are dealt with on a case-by-case basis, but we do have focus on energy, and you'll see in the Greenfire recommendations a strong recommendation to increase the funding for focus on energy program. More recently, so we're kind of in this situation in the United States where we're this balkanized energy market, not only by states, but by utility territory and by jurisdiction. We have the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission that's really regulating the wholesale markets. We have state utility bodies, a three-person appointed public service commission in Wisconsin that really has domain over the regulated utilities. We have cooperative and municipal utilities that have a different sets of governance. And then, we also in this market have all the local jurisdictions that pass their own planning and zoning laws. And so the question becomes, in this context and in today's market, and Keith started talking about this kind of like the gamification of what policies can we make that most quickly decarbonize. And I think that's definitely important. I guess and from my point of view, I think what's equally and maybe more important is how do we maximize the public participation, the consumer choice, the competition, and the local economic development benefit of these choices. And so one of the ways that we have been engaging is really to expand and defend consumer rights and individual rights and choice in the state, and pressure this kind of monopoly regulatory business model, because the technologies of today, we are not only today looking at technology disruption because of electrification and consumer access to technology and storage and just the technology transfer and the consumer interest in this. we're also facing a climate crisis and an economic crisis and a political crisis. So the question becomes, as we are this gray hole of state policy inactivity, how can we as the public better engage to prioritize these issues and to ensure that the benefits become local? And I think that what's laid out in the Green Fire energy plan is actually very astute. And those type of policies and public participation is really important for us. We are in litigation with the Public Service Commission right now to clarify third-party ownership in Wisconsin, and also to take advantage of two new FERC orders, relatively new. One is the demand response. So over a decade ago, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission put out Order 719 that established the negawatt as an actual value, meaning like if we're using a lot of energy at peak times and utilities have to spend a lot of money, which future ratepayers will pay back to create generation to satisfy those needs, would it be more cost effective to invest in demand reduction, negawatts, than in capacity development? And so FERC Order 719 allows consumers to receive the compensation for demand reduction, the same type of grid level compensation that utilities would get. Wisconsin did not adopt 719 at the time. And now with the new FERC Order 2222, which would allow the aggregation of distributed generation resources such as solar and storage to provide those grid resiliency services such as peak reduction and voltage regulation. At current, we're not allowed in Wisconsin to access those benefits because we never adopted 719. So that's also part of our litigation to better empower consumers. And I'll finish by saying this. I saw there was a question about the costs of the transition. And currently, there are a number of studies that have shown that in states across the United States, it would be the most cost-effective option for utilities to advance generation would be to give Tesla Powerwalls away to ratepayers, to actually purchase energy storage and give them away. And the reason is that the idea of reducing peak load use for consumers can avoid a lot of generation and provide local distribution system benefits. And it's scalable and it's at the point of use, which reduces power. So if this is the cheapest thing that public service commissions can do, is have utilities do this, how come so little of it is happening? And the reality is because that's a transition from a centrally controlled, heavily regulated, investor-centric business model to one in which you invest in the public and invest in the distribution system and trust in the public participation process and public use process to provide good services. And this, I think, is the challenge of our time. As an educational challenge, it's an engagement challenge and a participation challenge to really take advantage of this new market. And thanks for listening to me, and excited for the discussion.
Thank you, Nick. You crammed a quick history of utility regulation into a remarkably short amount of time. I'll have to somehow learn how to do that myself. We have a lot of great questions, as was alluded to, and I want to thank everybody. We'll try to get to some of them specifically, and then we'll try to kind of cluster some of them. But one of the things in the spirit of this webinar was to, try to help people listening figure out how they can get involved in the energy system. And we alluded to the fact that this open docket that's coming up with the Public Service Commission is to gather a lot of general information before I think what they're going to do is slice and dice it into smaller, narrower dockets. And then they did mention to us, because we were talking with staff, that they're going to have something called workshops, which actually made my ears perk up because as Nick just pointed out, that there is some challenges in just understanding the new technologies, the terms, and how they fit in to a legacy system that was not designed to even utilize these new technologies, and actually maybe possibly counterintuitive. So I want to kind of throw out to our panelists, one, just some thoughts on process, how you think people should engage in not only the open docket, but the PSC process in general, because I've talked publicly about how I think it's intimidating. I think it is totally inappropriate that you need an attorney to almost talk to the commission. So panelists, let's talk about how do we get the public more involved in the process?
I can jump in there if that's all right. Great question, Gary. Yes, the PSC engagement process can be extremely intimidating and a little wonky, and it does help to have a lawyer tell you where to submit your comments, for sure. So that's something Renew is definitely working on with our partners to try and create clearer, simpler opportunities for public engagement at the Public Service Commission. The PSC, the commissioners have expressed an interest in greater public engagement. So there are a number of different ways you can engage without a lawyer. There are places to put comments directly on the website. I think our three organizations often share action alerts that link to those opportunities to engage and voice your support for a solar project or for the carbon docket or whatever your priorities are, as those opportunities, sort of like a moving, rolling process, emerge. In the case of the carbon docket in particular, I think almost 24 entities have filed for what we call intervener status. That means they're full parties in the docket. Most of them will have lawyers and experts to testify and provide testimony and analysis throughout them. I really think this is likely to be a multi-year docket. So this will be a long process with multiple opportunities to engage. The public can also engage at multiple points during the process. So I think honestly, for now, the simplest way to engage is to sign up for all our newsletters, and we will tell you when it's simple and easy to engage and break down the issues for you. That's honestly the simplest way to do it now. It's very hard to follow the docket if you're not a paid expert who spends time doing only that. But we're here for you. We're here to sort of bridge that gap between the regulatory process and public engagement and interest. There's a tremendous amount of interest in this docket. So we're excited about that. And we will work our darndest to make sure you have an opportunity to engage.
Thank you, Heather. Good points, good to know. Any other panelists want to pipe in, or do you want me to move on?
I would say, I think the reality is that electricity is probably the most important issue that any voter should be voting on. If you look at all of the future projections, our entire society depends on electricity, and we all pay we're all captive to our utility, right? And if you're in an investor-owned utility territory in Wisconsin, I see a lot of questions related to this. You will pay for whatever happens now for 30 years into the future. So the real question is, how do we get voters and people to prioritize energy issues and to understand them in a way that they're pressuring their representatives to actually understand the issue and work in favor of consumers? Because the truth is that if left to their own devices, if we allow regulated utilities to run roughshod over the regulatory process and the political process, they will hold on to expensive fossil fuel assets for as long as they can. When they get rid of them, they'll get fully paid for them. They'll build clean energy assets as much as they possibly can, and they'll add it all to future ratepayer bills. They'll increase fixed charges, they'll decrease volumetric rates, and they'll further capture ratepayers. And so the political process is what we have right now to ensure that ratepayers' rights are protected, that our wallets are protected, that our choice is protected, and that these things benefit our local communities. So for me, the reality is all of the conservationists around this call, UW Extension System, all of the groups that are out there that care about the environment should dig deep into energy policy and start to prioritize this as an issue, because it will be something that all of us are stranded with for decades to come. And right now is the time for decision making. It's not 10 years ago. It's not 10 years from now. It's today.
Absolutely. No, that's why we put our report out and are having this webinar and urging everyone not to engage right now. A lot of questions around focus on energy and sort of how did we slip away from being a leader in efficiency. I think it's interesting that some of the budget initiatives and some of the legislative initiatives are to put more money in focus, and I think that's a great idea. But I also wonder if we shouldn't think about retooling focus at the same time to help consumers, prosumers, hopefully, utilize distributive energy technologies. And so I am curious about our panelists' thoughts on, are they concerned that we just want to save focus from legislative monkeying around, if you will, or is it the time to somewhat redesign focus on energy as a program as well? Any thoughts?
Yeah, Gary, this is Keith. I'll start us off. In the context of the Clean Energy Plan, we're having a number of discussions, and there's a lot about focus on energy, and as a lot of folks know, the governor's climate change task force recommended a doubling of the funding for focus on energy. The things I think that we're discussing are broader, and for example, and you mentioned earlier something known as performance-based rate making at the Public Service Commission. And focus on energy has for years been really rather laser focused on reducing kilowatt hours of electricity and therms of natural gas. So reducing energy use. And that's the point of energy efficiency largely. But that focus has been quite narrow. And what we're discussing now is more, what are the things we're really trying to achieve by doing that? So we're having a discussion about looking at a program that is really more motivated by reducing emissions, for example, by achieving equity, by reducing the cost of energy bills for low-income customers and for vulnerable communities, for communities of color. Looking at economic benefits and distributing those economic benefits like job creation, in ways that address equity. So those are some of the things that we could be, if we had a statewide energy efficiency program and small scale renewable program that was focused on those outcomes, it would actually look very different, and the program design would be very different for many of them. The last thing I'll say is that we do have we were a leader on energy efficiency for many years in the Midwest, at least. And at this point, we have a really antiquated program, mostly because it's based on how much money we spend, as opposed to being based on how much can we achieve. And so one of the other things we're discussing is having a energy efficiency resource standard, basically rather than having a target of let's spend 1.2% of retail sales of electricity to ratepayers, let's achieve a certain amount of energy efficiency and potentially these other things that I just talked about. And so we're looking at trying to shift the program to achieving certain outcomes as opposed to just spending a certain amount of money.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think performance-based rate making and a shift in the focus program really could work well hand in hand, and it already exists in terms of some infrastructure, so that wouldn't be that hard to coordinate the two and have them work in conjunction. Other panelists? One of the things that Greenfire has suggested, I think in this paper we put out, although sometimes comments that we submit to the PSC and the paper blur in my mind, is that there should be more citizen committees advising the Public Service Commission. And I think one example of where that could particularly work well is, if we were to have something like a performance-based incentive, the public members could help in the actual design of the metrics and how the performance-based incentive works, and in terms of the monitoring of it. That might scare the you-know-what out of the commission, but it certainly would make things more accountable. So it's just something to think about. I mean, it certainly doesn't take much effort on the part of the commission to start setting up advisory committees, even if they don't want to give up any more of their authority. But I just think it's an idea whose time has come, that if you want the public input into the process, you got to literally have the public at the table. So I throw that out there for consideration. I just did a quick time check, and we've got about maybe 8 to 10 minutes. So I just wanted the panelists to be aware of that. I want to briefly touch on the fact that there is a docket on parallel generation and net metering, because net metering is always very controversial. And there's no question that some utilities in some states are doing whatever they can to undermine it. I think it raises a different question, though, and that is do we need to think about different ways for rate making? And I'd like the panelists to talk about their thoughts on things like time of use rates, even maybe locational rates where DERs really do come into play, and just the whole idea of innovative rate making. Is Wisconsin ready for that discussion, and your thoughts on maybe how that should go forward?
Heather, you want to go first?
Sure. I'll just jump in. Yeah, rate making is the hot topic. I mean, it's really, it's going to touch on everything, right? Because it drives incentives and it drives investments. So net metering is the bill credit you receive for any excess energy you produce with your generation, your solar system on your rooftop, that exceeds the energy usage you're drawing from your utility. Now, the trick in Wisconsin is, depending on which utility, you could have a different cap on the size of the project that'll qualify. You could have a different netting period, as they call it. So, is it month to month, or is it an annual assessment? Certainly the annual assessment can be much more beneficial for customers because you generate more in the summertime than you can use in many cases, but you need more electricity in the winter because you're not generating as much with solar. So we have a patchwork quilt of policies in Wisconsin, and that is a barrier to both investment, but it's also a barrier to just consumer understanding of what, if I put solar on my rooftop, what does that mean for me financially? Well, it depends on your utility, depends on your net metering policy that exists with that utility at this point in time, and it depends on the size of the system you put on your property. So we need to standardize it. We need to improve it. In some states, like especially very sunny states that are much further along with solar, there have been major efforts to roll back net metering and to reduce bill credits for ratepayers who install renewable energy. But we're nowhere near the point in Wisconsin's rooftop solar capacity where we need to worry about having too much distributed energy on the grid. We have a long way to go. So we shouldn't worry about that. That should not be part of the net metering conversation. I think what's more important is thinking about really adequately compensating people who invest in renewable energy and get it onto their property. They're making those upfront investments and doing all the work to build capacity for the grid. And that capacity has value to your neighbor who's using electricity and to the utility itself, especially if the utility can access the sensors and tools and controls to harness that electricity and move it around the grid in a systematic fashion where it's needed, as what Nick was saying with integrating batteries and storage and things like that. So the short answer is net metering is great. It's important. It helps facilitate installation of renewables in Wisconsin, especially customer-owned renewables. We have a need for uniformity and standardization, and we have a need to improve the return on those investments. That's because they are not adequately valued at the rate of return they are receiving right now.
Thank you, Heather. Other panelists want to touch on that one?
I appreciate that context from Heather. I think, you know, that the commission's charter is to protect ratepayers from the profit motivations of investor-owned utilities and to help ensure that we're not cross-subsidizing, meaning we're not cutting rates for industrial users and shoving them onto residential meters. And the question is, do you trust the regulatory process? And I think that that's the real question behind the net metering debate is, you know, the current newest Commissioner Huebner was often quoting MREA 11 saying, you know, when it comes to utility rate making, in God we trust, everyone else bring data. And in Wisconsin, we have seen utilities for the last decade constantly beat this drum of every time someone puts solar on the roof, we have to raise rates for another ratepayer because it's a cost on ratepayers. If ratepayers are using less electricity, we have to sell that electricity somewhere. We have to make our profits and pay for our investments. So we're going to have to raise your rates. The parallel generation docket is very simply, what value does my money putting storage and solar or efficiency on my house or my business, what value does that have to other ratepayers? If I can reduce peak purchasing and reduce the need for utilities to buy expensive peak power, how does that affect your rates? If I can provide voltage regulation, if I can reduce the need for the utilities to build something new and charge me later for it, with my own money that you're not paying interest on through the regulated utility rate making process, is that a benefit? And I think that requires an robust regulatory oversight. It requires that regulators care about the real values of this. It requires that they have the knowledge and tools and the ability to force utilities to share real information, and that we have the ability to translate that into actual laws that that serve the commission's need and beyond that, the social needs. And so this parallel generation docket is extremely important for those reasons, not beyond the reasons that Heather has stated, which is just having a uniform market with real rules that provide adequate incentives for people to do these things for themselves. But if we don't get this right, if it's true that there's no way in our current political process that 3 regulators can regulate the most powerful lobby in the state of Wisconsin, then what's next? And so I think this is really a truth-telling docket, is to say, like, do we have the ability to adequately engage in this new conversation to provide the best economic benefits and really protect ratepayers and do it in a way that's intelligent and that learns from all the experience of our neighbors. There's a benefit to being a laggard in Wisconsin, right? There's the benefit to being this gray hole in activity. And so I think it's probably the most important docket that you'll see at the Public Service Commission, and something that everybody should be following and engaged with.
Thank you, Nick. I really hate to say it, but I think we're running out of time. So I will just say that we will post this recording and we'll try to answer some of the questions offline if we can, or publish something. And I think all of the organizations involved in this webinar are very committed to keeping you informed about these important dockets and budget items and the like. So we will continue to talk among ourselves about how we can collaborate and help educate the public and help keep the public involved. I'm not sure if I have to kick it back to Fred, but if anyone else needs to say anything, I will just say thank you very much for listening.
And likewise, Gary, I'll say the same thing. Keith and Heather and Nick, thank you so much for lending your time today. Really great observations, and I hope for all of you who took the time to join us today, thanks for being with us. You can see these are complex but really important issues. And as one of our panelists, Nick, I think you said, energy needs to be one of the most, if not the top conservation priority for all of us in Wisconsin. As we think about the economic implications and the environmental implications, we have to try to get this right. And Wisconsin can be that laboratory, move from that gray space to becoming the laboratory for innovation again. And we're excited about working with all of you to continue to advance that. So thanks very much to Gary and our panelists, and for all of you who took the time to join us. We will follow up and at least try to get to some of the questions that we couldn't get to during the discussion today. So stay safe, enjoy spring, everyone, and we will see you soon.